All right, so we're back with chapter 39, looking at cultural shifts during the Gilded Age, the last part of the 19th century and then into the 20th century. Okay, things we want to keep in mind here is that America is completely changing. Everything about the cultural fabric of America is different. The city is winning. People are going to live and work there. The farm is no longer seen as an actual viable place to make a living in the world that is. Where are my dogs? My dogs are wrestling right now. Get them good, get them good. Anyway, so it's no longer seen as like a viable lifestyle to really kind of stay on a farm and make it, right? Urbanization is causing the biggest amount of change, more than any other factor, more than industrialization, more than anything, okay? Throwing a bunch of people together in a small spot is usually a pretty good thing for getting people to have new ideas, and that's what makes cities great, right? Is the fact that we get a bunch of people together and new things happen, art and sports, etc. You name it, okay? With that, with more people, there's going to be a higher kind of drive to reform education, making sure that people are going to school, and there's going to be new educational opportunities for women and African Americans. In labor, there's going to be a shorter workday. Unions are going to be able to push the bosses to decreasing the workday from about 66 hours to 50 over the course of this time period. And what that allows is sports and leisure activities to blossom. This is where all the major American sports are built, right? Between baseball and football and basketball. People can actually go, like in this picture shows, to games and enjoy themselves, right? They have time to do that now. And even some can actually even play. The new opportunities that urban residents have access to include ideas, right? We've already mentioned sports and elite clubs. This would include country clubs, even racket clubs, that sort of thing. And of course, printed materials, new forms of newspapers, periodicals, etc. Women, all right? There's going to be a redefinition of what the place of women is going to be in the family, okay? They're having less children. It drops from 7 on average to 4 in 1900 for a family. In urban areas, it's no longer seen as super beneficial to have 7 kids running around, especially as child labor laws are going to be passed. They can't work, and so they really are truly another mouth to feed, another person to put in already cramped apartments, right? So having more kids doesn't mean a better economic standing. Whereas, on the farm, for instance, if you have a bunch of kids, and you might be able to plant more acres and harvest them and that sort of thing. So more kids on a farm is a slightly better option economically than it would be in a city, okay? Women also will push for other areas of reform, right? The prohibition of alcohol, or the outlawing of alcohol, also the regulation of child labor, and then finally they'll push the right to vote, which they'll finally get in 1919, okay? Now, let's chat about education. So first thing we want to talk about is that education is going to be reformed in order to get a better educated workforce. The whole reason why we're talking about sending kids to school, right, is to make sure that they are taught how to be competent workers in the workforce, okay? Education is also seen as a right during this time period and a cornerstone of democracy, okay? So church leaders and liberals, and that doesn't mean, like Democrat liberals today. It just means anyone who's pushing for change, get together and they see education as an area that needs to be pushed and it needs to be free, right? At this time, we are seeing schools that are completely segregated. So black and white schools by 1900 are completely separate. So they're going to have different and actually unequal systems of education. But this, kind of normal American status quo of not going to school for economic realities, right? Because you needed to work a job or stay on the farm. That's going to be overrun by the fact that we need to have workers in the industrial world that know what they're doing, okay? Like I mentioned, women will be able to go to college. They'll have women's only colleges. A couple of those include Vassar and Mount Holyoke. And by 1910, 40% of all college students will be women, even though many professions like doctors, lawyers, that sort of thing are going to be closed to them. They're still college educated. They're smart. There's just nowhere for them to enter. African American colleges will also pop up after the Civil War. These include Howard, Fisk, and Atlanta University. So more schooling opportunities, and what we're going to see is, a populace in America that is not only literate but is able to handle complex ideas and process those. Next thing is development of sports. So major sports here: development of baseball, football. Right, James Naismith invents basketball in 1891, and these three sports, they have slightly different pathways. Baseball was a gentleman's game. It kind of comes right on the heels of the Civil War. By 1903, we see it really instituted as America's national pastime. It's the sport that everyone goes to, and that's kind of switched places. Maybe today football is kind of seen more of as America's sport. This initially was just a college level sport. It actually hired players known as ringers would come into play, and it was incredibly violent. There's next to no rules. People just bash each other to bits. I think one year in your textbook it says 17 people died. So pretty insane that this happened. There's no NFL. That's why there's only, if you trace back 52 Super Bowls now, you get back to 1966, right? So early on in the Gilded Age, in the turn of the 20th century, football is really a college thing. Other forms of entertainment include circuses, riding bikes, right? Those are all new things that different groups are going to be able to enjoy now that they have leisure time. Now, what's really driving all this explosion in fun time is the fact that the majority of Americans that are lower classes, they're really not a huge middle class at this point, have more time, right? Work weeks are going from 66 to 60 hours down to 50 between probably like 1880, 1890 to 1920. So this is where they can play sports, so go to sporting events, and also go to these circuses, led by Barnum and Bailey and those sorts of things. Next thing we want to talk about is women. Women are very active during this time period. The women's sphere is expanding. Okay, before it had kind of been relegated to the home, and their skills of caretaking and piety and purity were basically supposed to be used to be good wives and good mothers, right? But now women are going to be put into the public sphere. They are being educated, and they are willing to go and enter into the world that they see around them, in a world that actually is kind of broken. Single women are working in jobs, working in clerical work. They're going to college. They're being involved in public life. They're exchanging ideas. And so what happens is we kind of have a new idea that comes to mind, which is the maternal commonwealth, right? And this idea basically says that, hey, we're college educated, we have skills, and we're going to use it to do public good, right? And that actually starts with prohibition. Alcohol is seen as a scourge, a menace of American society, and Frances Willard helps found the WCTU, which is the Women's Temperance Union, okay? And they basically make prohibition their number one cause. They pressure state and local governments to pass dry laws. This is where we get some dry counties, and it's linked with a certain feminine drive to purify society, right? Other areas we see women active is in the settlement house movement, and this was an area where immigrants went when they came to America. They have nowhere else to go, kind of like a halfway house. They can learn skills, how to cook, clean. They can learn English, and basically it makes sure that there's some place for the homeless to go to. They don't wind up on the streets, causing, either ending up as prostitutes or whatever else. Okay, the male spheres during the Victorian age are pseudo divided from that of the female. Of course, the stereotype is what I've written here. Male spheres includes the politics and earning wages. The female sphere is raising children and working in the home. But that's changing. Men are not necessarily super pumped about working 70 hours a day just to take care of their families and never seeing their kids. They want more leisure opportunities. They want more interaction with their families. And women don't want to just stay in the home. So this is truly the first, seed planted in differentiating, or maybe, I guess, mixing up the roles of men and women in American society. I wouldn't necessarily say that all families went from men being at home more and women entering the public sphere. But this is where we start to see the first kind of modern seeds plant that now kind of define our society. And the last couple of things that we're going to mention today are newspapers and challenges to generally accepted sexual orientations and gender orientations inside of this new Gilded Age area. The first thing that we're going to talk about is Victoria Woodhull. You want to know about her. She in 1871 declared that she had the right to love whoever she wanted to. It was an inalienable right. And she actually runs for president. I'll get you a picture of her real quick. Victoria Woodhull. Okay. Way kind of before her time here, advocating the rights of her case as a lesbian, right? And that is still very, very much an unaccepted social identification to call yourself a lesbian or gay. But we're starting to see it kind of pop out a little bit into, I guess, more accepting areas of American society. There's going to be a neighborhood, for instance, in New York City known as the Bowery, where homosexuals could find sanctuary, right? And could live life, not necessarily as fully fledged, open, gay rights activists, but there was a general sense of this is acceptable inside of this neighborhood, right? Almost like an arena of solitary neglect. At the same time, right, so that's a kind of liberalization of this whole business. At the same time, we have the Comstock Law, right? And the Comstock Law is going to ban all materials of any sort of sexual nature from basically being shipped through the federal postal service, right? So, if there was contraceptives, sex toys, personal letters with any sexual content, or any information regarding above items, it would be literally confiscated, and you can be arrested. And actually, 3,000 people are arrested for violating the Comstock Law, right? So, one thing that we always talk about in class is that there's never really a time period that developments are purely conservative, purely liberal, right? They're kind of moving next to each other. And we really do see this, starting in the back half of the 19th century, right? At the same time that we have gay neighborhoods popping up in New York City, and women that are working and advocating for rights, we see on the other hand the argument for prohibition, right? And this is one of those cartoons right here, right? This is the road to death, right? So any sort of alcohol, right? If you taste or sip it, if you're moderate, right? Basically all of these beginning little exercises lead to drunkenness, and you're going to fall off the cliff and die, right? So hyper-conservatism, okay? And they kind of, like I said, run next to each other as concurrent forces versus like, this is the way it is. Like everyone that's a woman is pushing for prohibition. And that's not the truth. Like the women in the WCTU are pushing for prohibition, right? But it's starting to get mixed up. It's starting to get convoluted. You can't say this is purely conservative or purely liberal. There are radicals certainly on either side, but there's going to be competing cultural tensions in American society, and those still are in place, very much in place today. Last thing we mentioned we're going to talk about is publishing. We want to make sure to mention William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. They published 2 newspapers, the New York World and the New York Journal, respectively. And basically, they develop a type of journalism known as yellow journalism. Okay, and basically, it's sensationalized literature in order to sell newspapers or other sorts of magazines, right? Newspapers during this time period are getting bigger and bigger. They were able to print it faster and reach wider audiences. Literacy rates are climbing up very, very high, approaching 100%. And so, and there's no TV, there's no radio, right? If you're gonna know what's going on in the world, you better pick up a newspaper and read it, right? So we get a Sunday section with a leisure page and a sports page, right? Women are seen as a group that needs to be courted because they are still running the domestic sphere and are buying materials for the home. So if we can get a lot of women's subscriptions, they're going to read it and influence how money is spent. There are also advice columns, right? So newspapers as entertainment really become a major factor, and different newspapermen try to outdo each other, right? And we do, they do that by making up some things. Like, you think fake news is an issue now. Literally, yellow journalism was fake news, right? I mean, we actually got into a war with Spain because of misrepresentations of what happened in the port of Havana when the USS Maine, that U.S. battleship, blew up in Havana Harbor in Cuba, and it was totally an accident. Like, we blame the Spanish, and these newspapers reported that the Spanish blew up our ship. Well, that wasn't true. That wasn't true at all. The sinking of the Maine, put up right here, was caused by an accident. Okay, all right. So, it's one of those things that it's used to sell newspapers, and we need to pay attention to. But once again, it's part of modern society, is knowing how to get the correct information and use it effectively. All right, so that'll be it. That'll be all for chapter 39. Good luck with your questions, and let me know if I can help you with anything. Thanks.